In a bustling city full of strangers, where people rush past each other without so much as a glance, two individuals kept crossing paths in the most unexpected way. It wasn't a busy street or a crowded cafe, but somewhere quiet, somewhere intimate, between shelves of forgotten stories, amid the smell of old paper and ink. Every time they visited, they found themselves drawn to the same section, the same authors. Little did they know, these simple, serendipitous encounters would soon intertwine their lives, altering their worlds forever. The soft chime of a bell rings through the air as Sarah steps into the bookstore, her favorite refuge from the chaos of everyday life. The scent of fresh ink and aging paper wraps around her like a comforting blanket. Her eyes scan the familiar shelves, the walls lined with books that have long been her companions in solitude. This place was more than a store to Sarah. It was a sanctuary. In this small corner of the world, she felt at peace, where the hustle of life couldn't reach her. She had been coming here for years, exploring new worlds and losing herself in the words of her favorite authors. But something had changed in recent months. Something, or rather, someone. Across the room, leaning casually against a shelf of classic literature, was Adam. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the spines of the books, his eyes fixed on the one in his hand. He was here almost as often as Sarah, though she had never spoken to him. At first, he was just another face, another book lover like herself. But lately, she found herself looking for him whenever she entered the store. There was something intriguing about him, something she couldn't quite put into words. Sarah's gaze lingers on him for a moment longer before she moves to her usual spot near the window. She sits down with a new book, the pages whispering softly as she flips through them, but her mind is distracted. She glances up every now and then, wondering what book Adam is reading today. What stories have captured his attention? Unbeknownst to her, Adam had noticed Sarah too. It wasn't intentional at first, just a brief recognition of a familiar face in the same quiet space. But over time, his eyes began to search for her whenever he entered the bookstore. There was something about the way she immersed herself in her reading, how she seemed to disappear into another world. He found himself curious about the books she chose, about the stories she loved, and about the life she led outside these walls. One afternoon, their paths finally crossed, in a way neither could avoid. Sarah, focused on a novel in her hand, didn't see Adam as she rounded the corner of the aisle. They collided gently, her book slipping from her hands and landing with a soft thud on the floor. "I'm so sorry," Sarah stammered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment as she knelt to pick up the book. "No, it's my fault," Adam replied, bending down to help her. He picked up the book and glanced at the cover. Tolstoy. "That's a heavy read." Sarah smiled, a little flustered but grateful for the conversation. "I've always loved his work. What about you? What are you reading?" Adam held up his book, a collection of essays by Virginia Woolf. "I guess I'm in a more reflective mood today." Their conversation flowed easily from there, and soon, what began as an awkward encounter turned into a regular occurrence. Each time they met at the bookstore, they found themselves lingering a little longer, talking about books, life, and everything in between. They didn't exchange phone numbers or make plans to meet outside of the bookstore. Somehow, their shared space between the shelves felt special, almost sacred. It was as if the walls of the bookstore kept the rest of the world at bay, allowing them to exist in their own little bubble. As the weeks passed, their casual chats evolved into something deeper. They began recommending books to each other, their conversations growing more personal with each passing encounter. Sarah discovered that Adam had an adventurous spirit, having traveled to different countries, but he always returned to books for a sense of home. Adam, on the other hand, learned that Sarah was a dreamer, someone who longed for more than the life she led, but had yet to find the courage to chase after it. One evening, as the sun began to set and the golden light filtered through the bookstore windows, Sarah and Adam found themselves sitting together in the small reading nook they had come to claim as their own. The conversation had grown quiet, but the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, warm, like a well-worn blanket. "Do you ever wonder why we keep meeting like this?" Sarah asked softly, her eyes fixed on the horizon outside the window. Adam paused, considering her words. Maybe it's fate, or maybe we're just two people who found something we didn't know we were looking for. Sarah smiled at his response, but there was something more behind her eyes. A question, a fear. She didn't want to admit it, but she had started to care for Adam in a way that scared her. This bookstore, this routine they had fallen into, had become the highlight of her days. But what if it wasn't enough? What if it never left the pages of the books they read together? Weeks turned into months, and the line between friendship and something more began to blur. Their connection deepened. Their conversations grew more intimate, and yet, neither had the courage to take the next step. It was as if they were both holding back, afraid to ruin the delicate balance they had created. One rainy evening, the turning point came. Sarah was late to the bookstore, caught in a downpour without an umbrella. She arrived drenched, her clothes clinging to her skin, and her hair plastered to her face. Adam was already there, sitting in their usual spot with 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. "You're soaked," he said with a chuckle, handing her a towel that the bookstore owner had kindly offered. "Thanks," she muttered, taking the towel and drying herself off. "I didn't expect the weather to turn like this." Adam watched her for a moment, his usual playful smile fading into something more serious. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Her heart skipped a beat. "Of course. Do you ever think about what this is? Us, I mean." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she searched for the right words. She had thought about it, more than she cared to admit. But saying it out loud made it real, and real meant risking everything. "I do," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think about it all the time." Adam's expression softened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. "I feel the same way, but I didn't want to push you, didn't want to ruin what we have." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in her feelings, but with that relief came a new fear. A fear of what came next. They had spent so long dancing around the edges of their emotions, and now there was no turning back. "What if we're wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "What if we try and it doesn't work?" Adam reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "Or what if it does?" For a moment, the world outside the bookstore disappeared. The rain continued to pour. The city continued to move. But in that small, quiet space, it was just them. 2 people, 2 lives, connected by their love of stories, now creating one of their own. As they sat together, hands intertwined, a new chapter of their lives began to unfold. But like any good story, the ending remained uncertain, leaving us all to wonder. Would their love be as timeless as the books that brought them together, or would it fade away like so many forgotten stories? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same again.